Hello, adventurers, and welcome back to Myths and Mischief. We're continuing our dive into the history of Pride from last time, when we covered the turning point of the modern movement, the Stonewall riots on June 28, 1969. If you missed that one, you can click the top right on your screen now to watch it. While you're at it, make sure you hit that like button and subscribe, and click the notification bell so you never miss an adventure. Today we're taking you on a journey through history to explore the evolution of queer love in ancient civilizations. We'll examine how queer relationships were viewed and represented in ancient societies. Long ago in the ancient world, Sappho of Lesbos lived around 600 BCE and was renowned for her lyrical poetry that celebrated love and desire between women. In fact, the term lesbian is derived from her name, showcasing the significance of her work in shaping our understanding of queer love. Unfortunately, most of Sappho's poetry is lost, but two major source fragments remain. The fragments are found in quotations in other ancient works, from a whole poem to a single word. The ode is written in the form of a prayer to Aphrodite, the goddess of love. The speaker is pleading for the attention of an unnamed woman and has been identified by her scholars as Sappho. It is split into 3 Greek hymns. She starts with an invocation, then flows into a narrative section and finishes with a request to Aphrodite. I implore you to read it yourself, as I could never trust myself to do it justice. Sappho described her beloved as feminine, proving even as far back in history as this that love always wins and can never be broken. Sappho asked the goddess to ease her pains from this unrequited love for this woman. However, Aphrodite comes forward. She informs Sappho that the woman who rejected her will pursue her in time. Moving forward in time, we find ourselves in ancient Greece, where male-male relationships were a common aspect of education and military structures. The concept of pederasty was notable in the sacred band of Thebes, composed of 150 male lovers. The complexity of these relationships is fascinating. While sexual and romantic love were involved, the older soldiers would serve as mentors and teachers to the young soldiers. I feel it is important to clarify that the use of pederasty is a broad one that does not indicate an allure to minors. The Sacred Band of Thebes was an elite military unit formed around 378 BCE until they were tragically wiped out at the Battle of Chaeronea in 338 BC against a young, not-so-great-yet Alexander. The unit was seen as a symbol of strength and unity, demonstrating how homosexual relationships can be viewed as a source of power and solidarity. Alexander the Great, by the way, was also thought to have a male lover. As we enter the Roman Empire circa 1st century CE, we see a more complex and nuanced landscape of queer love. Emperor Hadrian married men in public ceremonies. Their actions can be taken to reflect the beliefs of some, at least among the wealthy and powerful. While these relationships were often tied to power dynamics and patriarchal structures, they also demonstrate a level of normalization and acceptance that is worth further exploring. The so-called Dark Ages. Did you know that back in 342 CE, the law of Constantius II decreed by said emperor, homosexual marriage was outlawed in the Roman Empire? Yes, this issue goes way back. The so-called offense was punishable by death. This was the first legislation of its kind in the newly Christian Roman Empire. For all our ancient and medieval history buffs out there, have you heard of the Justinian Code? Well, decreed in 529 CE, the Byzantine Emperor Justinian made homosexual relationships a crime tied to God's wrath, which unfortunately set a precedent for medieval Europe. For instance, under the reign of Louis IX of France in the 1250s, a system of inquisitorial punishment was put in place, aimed squarely at those accused of sodomy. The consequences put you in front of the waiting flames of the stake. Meanwhile, in Florence, Italy, records attest that many queer relations existed. Yet, Alessandro de' Medici, the first Duke of the Florentine Republic, mandated a secret police called the Office of the Knight to target sodomites. Let's finish this era on a positive note, shall we? There are some expressions of the colored flag even in the so-called Dark Ages. because love conquers all. Behind heavy wooden doors in 12th century courts and hidden among monastery cloisters, queer love was a delicate dance. Poets, nobles, monks, and kings alike played a game of cat and mouse in an era of secrecy and repression. Behind closed doors, coded language, veiled references, and clever metaphors shared through secret missives. And so the vibrant culture of forbidden love thrived, the Renaissance and beyond. It unfortunately wasn't much better across the English Channel during the 16th century. In 1533, Henry VIII gets a little worked up about, and I quote, "the detestable and abominable vice of buggery," and signs the Buggery Act, making gay sex punishable by death. Unfortunately, the law would go on to influence centuries of anti-LGBTQ+ legislation throughout the British Empire. For instance, there was the very public case in 1750 where Thomas White and Thomas Smith were publicly hanged for sodomy. This unfortunately became increasingly common. But at the same time in the city of London, during the 1600s and 1700s, there were whispers on the streets of the first semi-organized LGBTQIA+ social spaces. These were called Molly houses, as gay men were called Mollies, secret clubs at which to meet and have a drink. Across the pond, we have the first documented case of a U.S. soldier being dismissed for homosexuality in 1778. Lieutenant Frederick Gotthold Enslin was drummed out of the Continental Army, and he would not be the last. Hopping over to Prussia, which by the way is no longer a country nor territory, but used to lay around where Russia and Germany meet today. Frederick Brandt was executed in 1781 by burning for homosexuality. This is a very real story that reminds us that even the most progressive leaders of the past, like King Frederick the Great, who was thought to be queer, had their own biases and blind spots.
All right, Max, I'll take it from here. Hello everyone, this is Jerry, and I'll be guiding you through the rest of our video, exploring the annals of LGBTQIA+ history, starting with the history from the 19th century onward. The 19th century saw the world undergo great changes and innovations during the Industrial Revolution. However, there was little change for the queer community. In the 1800s, there was an added layer of embarrassment and seclusion. Throughout Europe and North America, queer individuals, especially those presenting as transgender or gender nonconforming, were institutionalized in so-called asylums. These individuals were subjected to quote-unquote cures, like electric shock therapy, conversion therapies, lobotomies, solitary confinement, and other pseudoscientific techniques. But there were still glimmers of hope. In 1867, a German pamphlet penned by Karl Maria Kurt Benny sparked a pivotal moment in the fight for LGBTQIA+ rights, as he coined the term homosexuality in an impassionate plea for the decriminalization of sodomy laws. Unfortunately, though, targeted trials and violence continued throughout the century. Public figures, such as author Oscar Wilde, were tried and sentenced. In 1895, Wilde was sentenced to 2 years of hard labor for gross indecency. Bram Stoker, despite his book Dracula seeming to be homophobic, had written love letters to Wilde, and it was thought that he wrote Dracula as so aggressively heterosexual to hide that fact. Professor Magnus Hirschfeld, a teacher in Munich, Germany, was assaulted in 1897 while giving a lecture on homosexuality, and he was left with a fractured skull from the attack. These high-profile events sparked global awareness of anti-gay persecution and, in Germany specifically, symbolized the rise of anti-gay nationalism in pre-World War I. However, Professor Magnus Hirschfeld would not be stopped, and neither would the fight for LGBTQIA rights. In 1919, Hirschfeld founded the Institute for Sexual Science in Berlin. He used this platform to advocate for transgender rights and the decriminalization of homosexuality. Back in the USA, Henry Gerber founded the first gay rights organization in the country in 1929, known as the Society for Human Rights. The Chicago police, unfortunately, shut down the organization before it could take off. By 1933, Hirschfeld's institute was targeted by Nazi book burnings. Thousands of documents on LGBTQIA+ lives were destroyed. Now, of course, we have to take a moment to pause here at the Nazi persecutions. From 1933 to 1945, approximately 100,000 LGBTQIA+ people were arrested. 50,000 were sentenced, and 15,000 were sent to concentration camps. In those camps, they were forced to wear pink triangles and face death through forced labor, medical experiments, or execution. Post-World War II survivors were not even recognized as victims and were often re-imprisoned as their country's laws had not changed. The Cold War era in the USA, from the 1950s to the 1970s, was no better. Events that snowballed were coined the Lavender Scare. LGBTQIA federal workers were purged from their government jobs. FBI and the military conducted surveillance, blacklists, and interrogations on innocent people under the claim that queerness was a national security risk. From here on out, events fluctuate, moving from progress to regression and back again. Here's a little overview of major events spanning from the 1950s to the new millennium. In 1950, the Mattachine Society was founded by Harry Hay as one of the first sustained gay rights organizations in the USA. In 1961, Illinois decriminalized homosexuality, becoming the first USA state to do so. In 1970, the first Pride marches were held in New York, Los Angeles, and Chicago to commemorate the first anniversary of the Stonewall riots. 1973 saw homosexuality removed from the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of Mental Disorders, otherwise known as the DSM, by the American Psychiatric Association, or the APA, officially declassifying it as a mental disorder. In 1977, Anita Bryant's Save Our Children campaign in the USA launched a national anti-gay movement led by Bryant, overturning gay rights ordinances and launching a wave of religiously motivated homophobia. Her efforts fueled political organization on both sides. The 1980s were a tragic era of HIV/AIDS, disinformation, and neglect. Governments, particularly the Reagan administration, delayed their response to AIDS, resulting in tens of thousands of preventable deaths. Victims' bodies were denied funerals, and families were often barred from hospitals. In 1990, the World Health Organization, or the WHO, declassified homosexuality as a mental disorder, officially removing it from its international classification of diseases, 17 years after the APA did. They say that Pride traditions and celebrations as we know them today were born from the Reminder Day pickets held annually at Independence Hall in Philadelphia from 1965 to 1969. Planned by the Eastern Regional Conference of Homophile Organizations, ERCHO, these pickets aim to raise awareness about the rights of LGBTQIA+ individuals. ERCHO, formed in 1962, was a coalition of East Coast homophile groups, including the Daughters of Bilitis, the Janus Society, and the Mattachine Society, which would eventually expand to include other organizations. We've covered the Stonewall riots and subsequent commemoration protests in another video. Click the screen now to watch it, but it's worth mentioning in our timeline here. After the Stonewall uprising, located on Christopher Street in June 1969, the ERCHO suggested that they shift focus from planning the Reminder Day picket to organizing an annual demonstration in commemoration of Stonewall. At the November 1969 conference, the 13 voting organizations present adopted the following resolution. We propose that a demonstration be held annually on the last Saturday in June in New York City to commemorate the 1969 spontaneous demonstrations on Christopher Street, and this demonstration shall be called Christopher Street Liberation Day. At the turn of the century in the USA, efforts continued to expose transphobia and homophobia as well as decriminalize same-sex intimacy. In 2000, Private Barry Winchell, an American soldier, was murdered by his comrades for dating a trans woman. This sparked outrage against violent cases of transphobia in the military. In 2003, in the case of Lawrence versus Texas, went all the way up to the Supreme Court and ended up with the decriminalization of sodomy laws nationwide. In 2008, on one hand, the legal battle around Proposition 8 in California galvanized national LGBTQIA+ activism and legal advocacy. On the other hand, the judge ruled to ban same-sex marriages. As the years went by, new rules were instated, allowing LGBTQIA+ people to openly serve in the U.S. military as of 2010. This was the repeal of the Don't Ask, Don't Tell ruling. In 2015, the Supreme Court's ruling in Obergefell v. Hodges legalized same-sex marriage nationwide. A tragedy ensued the following year, in 2016, during the Pulse nightclub massacre in Orlando, Florida. 49 were killed and 53 were wounded in one of the deadliest mass shootings in history, all because the crowd dared to be Latinx and trans. Finally, Just 5 years ago, in 2020, the Supreme Court ruled that LGBTQIA+ people are protected under Title VII. This was a landmark victory for employment discrimination protections. Now let's zoom out and have a look at some events, the good, the bad, and the ugly, from around the world. In 2001, the Netherlands became the first country to legalize same-sex marriage. In 2009, Uganda introduced a frightening bill called Kill the Gays, which stoked the fire for a national wave of violence, outings, and arrests. The country also became the first in the 21st century to enforce the death penalty for LGBTQIA+ identity with the signing of the Anti-Homosexuality Act in 2023. In 2013, Russia passed a law that banned LGBTQIA+ advocacy, leading to beatings, arrests, and anti-gay propaganda to allegedly protect children. In 2021, Hungary's LGBTQIA+ anti-propaganda law had the same goal and remains in place. Starting in 2017 and continuing into the present, according to reports, Chechnyans have seen anti-gay purges. Human Rights Watch and local outlets have alleged state-led detentions, torture, and disappearances of LGBTQIA+ individuals into secret prison camps. A few years ago, reports surfaced that Brazilians experience a trans homicide epidemic, disproportionately affecting Black trans women. Reports began in 2020 and were unclear whether they're ongoing. In 2023, in South Korea, right-wing extremists violently disrupted Pride celebrations. Then churches called for mass prayer against LGBTQIA+ infiltration. Around the world, there has been a rise in the 21st century of LGBTQIA+ suicides linked to cyberbullying. In the 2010s, high-profile and tragic cases such as those of Tyler Clementi in 2010 and Leila Alcorn in 2014 put youth suicide and trans visibility on international news and radar. These led to campaigns like It Gets Better in the USA and widespread demands for improved mental health protections. The 2020s have proven to be another era where progress and regression are neck and neck. The worldwide political climate is at absolute tension, and the LGBTQIA+ community feels its effects hard. However, as we've shown, we've been here throughout history, and we will continue to persist. Thank you so much for joining Max and me on this video today. We hope that you got something from this video, and as always, thank you for watching Myths and Mischief. See you all again soon.